Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Laughing Skull podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the Lavender Town Syndrome. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're unfamiliar with it, I'm just going to ask this. Did you play the 1998 Pokemon games Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue? They were wildly popular. They were very revolutionary for the time. It really created an entire genre of amazing games that just brought the entire world together for a little while. Pokemon's always been this amazing franchise. I think it's actually the most successful franchise of all time. I think it actually beats Disney. But there was this one part of the game called Lavender Town. And in the original versions of the games back in Japan, before it ever made it to the States, we had Pokemon Red and we had Pokemon Green. Now, whenever it came to America, the green version was swapped out with blue. And a lot of other parts of the game was changed as well, including some of the music, some of the Pokemon choices, some of the language, censorship, and all the great stuff. But when it came to Lavender Town, that was a very specific one that was changed for the original Japanese release, which created a whole bunch of different conspiracy theories. Apparently, it caused a bunch of children to commit suicide. Lavender Town's a very interesting place. In the Pokemon lore, it is literally a town that is a cemetery. So you have the Lavender Town building, which is a graveyard, I suppose. If I'm remembering this correctly, because it's been a little while since I played these games, but I would love to go back and revisit it because Pokemon Red and Blue is probably without a doubt my favorite Pokemon games. But when you get to Lavender Town, that's when you notice that the entire tone of the game kind of shifts. So the entire game, it's like the soundtrack, everything's like really happy-go-lucky. You're kind of just like really feeling it. You feel like you're on a great adventure. But when you get to Lavender Town, it kind of feels very ominous. It feels very off-putting. It kind of makes you feel weird. The music is very strange. And the music's been tied to a lot of mass child suicides that happen in Japan. Accordingly, so the origin introduced in Pokemon Red and Green, Lavender Town is the designated graveyard for deceased monsters and is known for ghost sightings. The first edition of these games was released in Japan in February 1996. By the time the games were released in the United States 2 years later, the original music for Lavender Town, composed by Junichi Basada, has been changed. Since the ambience of the town was that of a graveyard, the music was relatively creepy, with players on the gaming message boards Cerebi, which is still active, very surprisingly, and NintendoWorlds.net. Discussing this in 2008 and 2009, a remix of the song appeared in early 2010, attempting to intensify its spookiness. The first version of the creepypasta story was uploaded to Pastebin on February 21st, 2010. It stated that after the first few days after the release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, there were over 100 suicides amongst children between ages 10 to 15. During the investigations, the detective concluded that the music that played in Lavender Town, thanks to a secret code included in 104 of the original cartridges, was driving children to kill themselves. So there's this big conspiracy theory that Japan was kind of working with the government, I guess, to weed out people, or I guess it's just something like that. So that's how the creepypasta began. It's actually probably one of the most, if not most famous creepypasta other than Slenderman. It's definitely groundbreaking for the time that it came in because this is something that we've been talking about for well over 20 years at this point. It's pretty crazy, right? It's been almost 25 years. But I don't really know if this is true, if it actually happened this way, or if this is all up for speculation. I'm not entirely 100% sure. All I know is it is a very fascinating story. So if you need to learn a little bit more about some of the stuff that goes along with it, there are many different things that we can discuss. One of the greatest theories about Lavender Town is the whole Gary's Raticate story, or Pokemon Trainer Blue in the games, depending on which version you're playing. It'd be red or blue or green, I guess, if you want to play the Japanese version. But typically he goes by Pokemon Trainer Blue. So in the original in the original Pokemon Blue version, when you encounter your rival in Lavender Town, he asks whether or not you know what it's like to have one of your Pokemon to die. At this point in the game, he no longer has his Raticate that he used in previous battles. Your rival battle before this took place aboard the SS Anne. Your rival's Raticate sustained serious injuries from the battle, but because of the crowding and confusion on the luxury liner, he was unable to make it to the Pokemon Center in time and the Raticate passed away. The real reason your rival is in Lavender Town to begin with is to lay his deceased friend to rest. Despite all of this, your rival never outwardly tells you that you're responsible for the death of his Pokemon. He hides his grief and instead channels that energy into the motivation he needed to continue his quest to become the Indigo League champion. The death of that Raticate effectively destroyed your rival's impish childhood innocence. Although he tells himself towards you, which further fuels his ambitions, tearfully swooning on his Raticate's grave to not fail in what he set out to do, he trains hard in hopes of becoming better than you, defeating you, and eventually make it to the Pokemon League. Mere moments after he became Indigo League champion, he was defeated by you. Although he fulfilled his promise to his fallen Pokemon, it was only for a painful brief instant. In the end, your rival is scolded by his grandfather while you receive the professor's praise. So if you know anything about this, or if you remember anything about this, if you did ever play the games, and if you need a refreshing start on it, in the original games, the last time you fight Gary, I believe, is in Cerulean City, right before you fight Misty. And he has, I believe, 4 Pokemon at this point, including Eradicate. So in the Pokemon games, you can carry up to 6 Pokeballs. But when it comes to Gary, when you fight him again on the SS Anne, he has, I believe, 4 or 5 Pokemon at this point. And when you encounter him later on at Lavender Town, he still does not have his entire 6 Pokemon for a team, which is kind of strange because his Raticate is no longer on the team. So it's as if he never replaced it, which that's what starts the whole theory about whether or not you killed it. It would make sense because after you fight him on the boat, you fight him inside of the graveyard. And he starts talking about, have you ever had one of your Pokemon die? So this is a great changing point in the entire Pokemon lore because it, as I stated earlier, it's kind of like a really fun, adventurous, happy game for children. And then you kind of get to the moment where you realize that these cute, fuzzy little creatures that you control, that you fight with, that you trained with, are actually capable of dying. So it's like a big sense of realism for, just real life. And now you kind of wonder, did you or did you not kill the Raticate? That's an interesting story on its own. The Lavender Town Syndrome, also known as the Lavender Town Toned Down, was a peak in suicides and illness of children between the ages of 7 to 12 shortly after the release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, back in February 27th, 1996. It is crazy to believe that this is 25 years old. Holy shit. So rumors say that these suicides and illnesses only occurred after the children playing the game reached Lavender Town, whose theme music had extremely high frequencies, which apparently only younger children could hear this. I've listened to the original music from Pokemon Green. It did not affect me, but I would maybe I wouldn't. I would like to test it with another kid, but I don't know if that's actually a good idea, just in case. It probably wouldn't, but you don't want to fuck around and wait around to see if it could, Due to the Lavender Tone, at least 200 children supposedly committed suicide, and many more developed illness and afflictions. These children who committed suicide usually did so by hanging or jumping from heights. Holy shit, that is fucked. Those who did not acted irrationally complained of severe headaches after listening to Lavender Town's theme. It does give you a headache. If you listen to it long enough, it does give you a headache. Although Lavender Town now sounds different depending on the game, this mass hysteria was caused by the first Pokemon game released. After the Lavender Town incident, the programmers had fixed Lavender Town's theme music to be of a lower frequency, and since children were no longer affected by it, I guess all was good. One video appeared in 2010 using special software to analyze the audio of Lavender Town's music. When played, the software created images of the Unknown near the end of the audio. But this raised a big controversy since the Unknown, which are a Pokemon that didn't come in until Generation 2, like Silver, Gold, Crystal, but the Unknown translate to leave now. There is also the said beta version of Lavender Town. It is said that the beta version of Pocket Monsters, which is Pokemon if you didn't know, was released to some kids to test the games. So when it comes to the creepypasta, there were a couple elements that kind of add up, that kind of just spawn in. I myself have never really encountered them except for the final one. So the three elements consist of the white hand sprite, the buried alive sprite, and the ghost animation. Now the ghost animation is actually already part of the game. I will go ahead and get to that. It's kind of like a secret boss. Not really a secret boss, but it's kind of like you have to fight it to progress, but you can't encounter it until you deal with the rockets. Once you deal with the rockets, or I'm sorry, you have to get this item. I don't remember what it was, but I think it was you have to visit Fuji, I believe, and then you're able to go up there and get past it. And the sprite actually turns out to be a deceased Marowak, Cubones' missing mom, who apparently was killed by Team Rocket, and she now haunts the Lavender Town top of the tower. So the White Hand sprite, known as the code as whitehand.gif, this was scripted to appear as a Pokemon on the third floor of the Lavender Tower. It is divided into 4 separate animations. It has its own cry, it has the Pokemon released before the battle, an idle, and 2 attacks. These attacks are unknown as they are simply listed as Fist and Brutal. Very strange for a children's game. While viewing the animation has been proven to be hazardous, viewing the frames of the model have been proven to have no adverse effects. The white hand is depicted as a shriveled, slightly decayed hand with surprising details. Flesh is peeled back from the bone and several tendons dangled realistically out of the wrist. The first attack is the hand balling into a fist and then swinging forward. However, the brutal animation is missing several frames. The hand seems to open up and then cuts out. After a few seconds, it reappears, closes again, and no record has been found of the missing frames. I'm looking at a picture of it right now, and it does look pretty... It looks pretty fucked for a children's game. The ghost animation, coded as the Haunting, was intended to be placed in several areas throughout the tower, which you do when you first go in, and you're not able to see the ghosts properly, which turn out to be mostly Ghastlies, maybe a Haunter. It does show up as the ghost animation. So that's just an interesting thing. Players cannot interact with it, however, leaving many to believe that it was intended to be a background feature. The ghost animation as well must be viewed in individual frames. It is composed of 59 frames total. However, after extraction, around half of these frames have been revealed to be the standard ghost model used in Pocket Monsters. Around a quarter of the remaining frames are composed of static to produce a fading effect. However, interspersed with these bursts of statics are several frames of screaming faces along with the image of a skeleton man in a cloak. This I did not know about. Hypothesized to be the Grim Reaper and of several killed corpses. The meaning behind these are unknown. While under oath before the Video Game Commission Board, lead programmer Hisarashi Sagabi testified as to having no knowledge as to what these images surfaced. Out of all the phenomena associated with LTS, this animation is most speculated on. In his theorist video games and the manipulation of the human mind, Dr. Jackson Turner argued that the image was intentionally placed in. Due to the brief time appeared on the screen and the graphic nature of the frames, Turner theorized that these were meant to subliminally influence players into becoming more frightened by the disturbing surroundings. You know, for a video game back in the 90s, much less for a kids game, this is pretty cool. So whenever I get back to playing Pokemon Red, I will be recording it for my YouTube channel. I do want to get to this Lavender Town part, and I do want to try to make an entire episode on that, because it's just... I like spooky shit, so this is going to be fun. So next and final, we have the Buried Alive model. It is often referred to as its code, the Berryman script. The Buried Alive model has to be found on the final story of the Pokemon Tower, in what has now been replaced with the Marowak Ghost. According to the scripts assigned to it, the Buried Alive model was intended to be the boss of the tower. Once reaching the top floor, the following conversation would take place. Buried alive. You're here. I'm trapped. And I'm lonely. So very lonely. Won't you join me? After this, the battle would have been initiated. Once in battle view, the Buried Alive model appears to be a decaying human corpse attempting to crawl out of the ground. It has been programmed to have 2 white hands, a Gengar, and a Muck. Very strange, because it's at this point in the game you've never even seen a Gengar. Like, Gengar doesn't even really show up until later on. Ironically enough, for a Pokemon game, Gen 1 had ghost types as its own type, but there was no solid ghost type Pokemon in general. So you had Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar, they were all poison and ghost. And they were the only Pokemon that were ghost type in Gen 1, and they were all part of the same family tree. So it's kind of, I don't know why Muck would be included, because he's just a poison type. He's not really a ghost, but I mean, I guess it is what it is. Strangely enough, a protocol for the Buried Alive animation after it was defeated were not written. In the case of the player defeating him, the game would just simply freeze. However, a specific ending was written by an unknown programmer upon losing the battle. In this ending, the Buried Alive was to have finally stated, "Finally fresh meat," followed by the several lines of gibberish. He was to have then dragged the player character into the ground surrounding him. The scene would finish with the typical game over screen. Which, you're a 10-year-old playing this game, by the way. You were supposed to be 10 in the game canon. However, in the background, an image of the buried alive character devouring the player has to have been shown. Especially strange are the protocols for after this scene. Cartridge was to download this image to a small internal memory contained in the Game Boy, overwriting the title screen that normally accompanied a Game Boy turning on. Instead, however, when it was started, the player would view this image as the sound file was played. The intended purpose of the effect, unlike many of the other factors leading towards it, it just doesn't really make any sense. So the model of it's literally like a little zombie skeleton crawling out. It's not too graphic compared to the hand, but it is still very strange that it would be in a children's game. I don't know. Like, I really like the concept of Lavender Town. I really like the creepiness of it. It does, like I said, change the entire tone of the game. It does make everything much more drawn into the real world, if it makes sense. I know we're talking about like zombie corpses and hands and ghosts and shit, but it really brings you into the realization that, you know, hey, these little things can die. You're a child learning about death, and you're learning it through a game about having illegal cockfighting, but it's legal. And I think there's just something really interesting about that, especially whether or not the suicides actually happened, if the children really died, if we really killed Gary's Raticate. I don't know. But what I do know is the music is fucking bopping. If you've ever heard this, the remixes for it, Lavender Town has a very, very special OST. So, if you haven't ever played Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue, or Pokemon Green, even Pokemon Yellow, I highly recommend it. They're very, very fun games. They're very challenging compared to more recent Pokemon games. Horribly balanced. So if you got a team of Psychic Pokemon, you're pretty much just GG winning the entire game. But if you would like to learn more about Lavender Town, I highly recommend looking it up. It's a really, really good creepypasta. Just makes you wonder, did these kids really commit suicide? I don't know. But on that thank you guys very much for keeping up with the podcast. Please leave a like on the video for YouTube and subscribe if you're interested in more. So, this was episode 5 of the Laughing Skull podcast, and I will see everybody next week with episode 6. Until then, stay spoopy, my friends.
저